"My husband doesn't touch me again," Magnolia Thornwood whispered to a stranger at a barn dance, and those 6 words would set the Nebraska prairie on fire. At 6'1", Maggie had married Cyrus Thornwood out of desperation, a Civil War veteran who needed a strong wife for hard land. But on their wedding night, he turned away, and for 3 years their marriage bed stayed cold as a January grave. Then came Reed Dalton, the young farmer from the neighboring homestead, with rough hands and eyes that saw her not as a burden, but as a woman. When he stepped closer that first night and made her feel alive again, Maggie had to choose: keep living a respectable lie, or risk everything for a love that could destroy them both. But in a small town where secrets spread faster than wildfire, how long could forbidden passions stay hidden? The confession came out sideways, the way truth always does when it's been locked up too long. Maggie had 2 whiskeys in her, more than she'd ever drunk in public, and the barn was hot with bodies and fiddle music and the smell of hay and sweat. Reed Dalton had asked her to dance, just one dance. She'd said yes because Cyrus was in the back room playing cards like he always did, because her feet hurt from standing alone by the refreshment table, because this young farmer with kind eyes had looked at her like she was worth asking. They moved through the waltz, and Reed didn't complain about her height, didn't make jokes about needing a stepladder. He just held her waist steady and matched her steps, and somewhere in the middle of the second turn he said, "You're a beautiful dancer, Mrs. Thornwood. How come you never smile when you dance with your husband?" The question cracked something open inside her chest. "Because my husband doesn't see me when we dance," she heard herself say. "Doesn't see me at all, really. Hasn't touched me since our wedding night. Hasn't looked at me like I'm a woman in 3 years. Reed's hand tightened slightly on her waist. His eyes, blue with flecks of green like creek water in summer, went soft with something that looked like pain. Not pity, pain, like her loneliness hurt him too. "That's a crime," he said quietly. "A woman like you should be touched every day." Maggie's breath caught. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too full of people who might hear the wild hammering of her heart. She pulled away, mumbled something about needing air, and fled to the darkness outside the barn, but Reed followed. She stood by the fence line, gripping the rough wood so hard splinters bit into her palms. The prairie stretched out black and endless, under a sky crowded with stars. She heard his boots in the dirt behind her, slow and careful, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have said that. You're a married woman, and I had no right—" "You had every right to speak the truth," Maggie interrupted, still facing the darkness. "My husband doesn't want me. Never did. He married me because he needed someone strong enough to help run the ranch. Someone who could haul water and mend fence and work like a man. And I married him because my father died and left me with nothing, and I was 24 years old and too tall and too strong, and no other man was asking." Her voice cracked. "I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself useful enough, he might eventually— But he doesn't. He won't. On our wedding night, he told me the war broke something inside him, that he couldn't be a husband to me in that way. And then he moved his things to the room above the barn, and I've slept alone every night since." The silence behind her was so complete, she thought maybe Reed had walked away. Maybe he'd heard enough. Maybe confessing to a near stranger was the stupidest thing she'd ever done. But then his voice came, low and rough with emotion. "Maggie." No one called her Maggie except her mother, dead 6 years now. Hearing her name in his mouth felt like a door opening. She turned around. Reed stood 3 feet away, hat in his hands, looking at her like she was something rare and precious. Not with pity, not with the casual assessment men usually gave her, measuring whether she was worth the trouble. He looked at her like she was exactly what he'd been searching for, without knowing he was searching. "You deserve better than alone," he said. "Deserving and getting are different things, maybe." He took 1 step closer. "But sometimes what you deserve comes looking for you." Another step. Maggie's pulse thundered in her ears. She should stop this. Should remind herself that she was Cyrus Thornwood's wife, that she'd made vows in front of God and the whole town. that wanting wasn't enough to make something right. But when Reed reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, when his calloused fingertips brushed the side of her face with a gentleness that made her knees weak, all those should-nots dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. "Tell me to leave," Reed whispered. "Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll walk away right now. I'll tip my hat to you in town and keep my distance and never mention this again." Maggie looked into his eyes, really looked, and saw no deception there, no game, just a man who saw a woman drowning and was offering his hand. "Don't leave," she breathed. Reed's thumb traced her cheekbone. "Then I won't." He kissed her so softly it felt like a question. Maggie answered by rising up on her toes. She didn't have to rise far. They were nearly the same height, and kissing him back with 3 years of loneliness and hunger and desperate, aching need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Reed pressed his forehead to hers. "This is dangerous," he said. "I know. Your husband is playing cards and drinking whiskey and won't notice I'm gone for another hour at least. The town will crucify me if they find out." Maggie pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "But Reed, I've been crucified every day for 3 years. I've been buried alive in a marriage that's just a pretty word for prison. If this is wrong, at least it's the first thing that's felt right since I said I do to a man who didn't want me." Reed cupped her face with both hands, his expression fierce and tender at once. "I want you. God help me, Maggie. I've wanted you since the first time I saw you riding fence line, like some kind of warrior queen. And if you'll have me, if you'll risk it, I'll make you feel wanted every single day." Somewhere in the barn behind them, the fiddle struck up a new song. Laughter and stomping feet drifted out into the night. Inside, people were dancing and drinking and living their normal, acceptable lives. Out here in the darkness, Maggie was making the choice that would either save her or destroy her. She took Reed's hand. 3 weeks, she said. "Give me 3 weeks to figure out how to do this without the whole town finding out immediately. Can you wait 3 weeks?" Reed brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Maggie, I'd wait 3 years if that's what you needed." But they both knew they wouldn't make it 3 years. They'd be lucky to make it 3 months before someone saw, someone talked, someone told Cyrus that his giant bride had found comfort in another man's arms. The question wasn't whether they'd get caught. The question was whether what they found in each other would be worth the price they'd have to pay. 22 days later, Maggie stood in Reed Dalton's barn, holding a wrench she didn't need to return, watching him work on the well pump with his shirt off, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd been lying to herself about waiting 3 weeks. She'd been lying about lots of things. About being able to keep this platonic, about just wanting friendship, about maybe talking a few times and seeing where things went naturally. The truth was burning through her like prairie fire. She wanted this man with an intensity that scared her breathless, and from the way he'd frozen mid-motion when he heard her footsteps, his back muscles going tense under sun-browned skin, he wanted her just as badly, Maggie. Her name in his mouth again, rough as gravel, sweet as honey. Reed turned around slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might spook her into running. Sweat gleamed on his chest and shoulders. Dirt smudged his forearm. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were wild with something that looked like hunger and fear mixed together in equal parts. "What are you doing here?" "Cyrus is in Whistler's Gap until tomorrow. Cattle auction." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I told myself I was returning the wrench. But that's not why I'm here." Reed set down the piece of metal he'd been holding. His hands were shaking slightly. "Why are you here?" 22 days they'd managed to behave. 22 days of stolen glances across the general store, of brief conversations about weather and crops when they passed on the road, of lying awake at night, thinking about a kiss that shouldn't have happened, but lived in her memory like a brand. 22 days of trying to be good, to be proper, to honor vows that her husband had broken first by refusing to honor her. "Because I'm so goddamn lonely I can't breathe," Maggie said, and her voice finally cracked. "Because I lie in that empty bed every night and feel myself disappearing. Because my husband doesn't see me and doesn't touch me, and I'm 27 years old, and I feel like I'm already dead. And then you looked at me at that dance, like I was alive and beautiful and wanted. And Reed, I can't go back to pretending I don't feel this." She dropped the wrench. It hit the dirt floor with a dull thud. Reed crossed the distance between them in 4 long strides. "This is wrong," he said, even as his hands came up to frame her face. "No, you're married. In name only. The town will destroy you. They've been destroying me slowly for 3 years." Maggie grabbed the front of his work pants, pulled him closer until she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. "At least this way I get to feel something besides empty first." Reed's control shattered like dropped glass. He kissed her hard, desperate, like a drowning man finding air. Maggie kissed back with 3 years of starvation, fisting her hands in his hair, pressing herself against him without shame or hesitation. His hands moved down her sides, mapped the curve of her waist, gripped her hips like he was afraid she'd vanish. "Tell me to stop." Reed gasped against her mouth between kisses. "Maggie, tell me to stop and I will. Don't stop. Don't you dare stop." He backed her against the barn wall, gentle despite the urgency, and kissed her throat, her collarbone, the hollow behind her ear. Maggie's head fell back and a sound escaped her that she'd never made before, raw and needy and gloriously alive. Reed's rough farmer's hands were reverent on her body, touching her like she was precious, like she was art, like she was everything he'd been looking for. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So damn beautiful, Maggie. How could any man not want this? Not want you?" She pulled his face back up to kiss him again because she couldn't form words anymore, could only feel his calloused palms sliding up her arms, feel his heart pounding against her chest, feel herself coming back to life after years of being a ghost in her own skin. They made love in the hayloft, with afternoon sunlight slanting through the gaps in the barn walls, dust motes dancing in the golden air, the smell of hay and horse and summer heat surrounding them. Reed touched her with a wonder that made her want to weep, tracing the strong lines of her shoulders, the length of her legs, every part of her that Cyrus had made her feel ashamed of. He made her feel powerful instead of awkward, magnificent instead of too much. Afterward, they lay tangled in blankets Reed kept up there, Maggie's head on his chest, his fingers drawing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "I've been building this moment in my head for 22 days, Reed said quietly, terrified of it, wanting it so badly I could barely think straight when I saw you. Me too." Maggie traced the scar on his ribs. Some farming accident, probably. "I kept telling myself I was going to be strong, going to honor my marriage vows, going to do the right thing. And now?" She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Now I realize I've been honoring vows to a man who broke his first. Cyrus promised to love and cherish me, to be a husband. He's done neither. I've given him 3 years of loyalty for a marriage that only exists on paper." She touched Reed's face, let her fingers trace his jaw. "Maybe it's time I stopped being loyal to someone who doesn't see me and started being loyal to myself." Reed caught her hand, kissed her palm. "What does that mean?" "It means I can't leave him yet. Can't just walk away. I have nowhere to go, no money of my own. The ranch is his, the house is his, even the clothes on my back he paid for." The old shame tried to rise up, but Maggie pushed it down. "But it also means I'm not going to stop seeing you, not going to stop feeling alive. We'll have to be careful, meeting here or at the line shack on the boundary between our properties. Somewhere Cyrus won't find us, and if he does find us..." Maggie had thought about this. "Spent the last 22 days thinking about nothing else, really. Then I'll face whatever comes. But Reed, I can't go back to being dead. I won't." He pulled her down for a long, slow kiss that tasted like promise and danger in equal measure. "Then we won't let you." They met in secret all through August and into September. The line shack became their sanctuary, a tiny one-room cabin on the property line where they could steal hours away from the world's judgment. Reed brought blankets and candles. Maggie brought food she'd hidden from the ranch house. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. Reed told her about losing his parents to cholera, about homesteading alone, about seeing her that first time and thinking she looked like something out of a legend. Maggie told him about her mother teaching her to waltz despite her height, about her father's failed ranch, about marrying Cyrus out of pure survival instinct. But mostly they didn't talk. Mostly Reed touched her with that same reverent wonder, and Maggie learned what her body could feel when someone wanted it, and they built a small, secret world where she was loved instead of tolerated. "You're different," Reed said one evening in late September, running his fingers through her hair as they lay in the dying light. "When you first came to me, you were so careful, like you were apologizing for existing. Now you take up space like you own it." Maggie smiled against his chest. "That's what being seen does. Makes you remember you're real. You were always real, Maggie. Your husband was just blind. Well, you see me. And that's enough." But it wasn't enough. Not really. Because every time Maggie rode back to the Thornwood Ranch, she felt herself splitting in two, the alive woman who belonged to Reed and the hollow wife who belonged to Cyrus, and she knew, with a certainty that sat heavy in her gut, that she couldn't live split forever. Something had to give. It gave on a cold October morning when Cyrus came back from a cattle drive a full day early and found her horse gone at dawn, found her tracks leading toward the Dalton property. Followed them with growing suspicion until he reached Reed's barn and heard sounds that couldn't be mistaken for anything innocent. Maggie was laughing, actually laughing, as Reed kissed her neck in the hayloft, both of them still tangled in blankets and each other. When she heard the barn door slam open below, the laughter died in her throat. "Magnolia!" Cyrus's voice raw with rage. Reed's body went rigid. Maggie's heart stopped. For one frozen moment, they just stared at each other, naked and exposed and caught, while heavy footsteps climbed the ladder to the loft. Then Cyrus's face appeared at the top of the ladder, red as a sunset, eyes wild with a fury that made Maggie instinctively pull the blanket higher. But there was no hiding this, no explaining it away. Her husband had finally seen her, and from the murderous expression on his face, Maggie realized with cold, clear certainty that the price for being seen was going to be higher than she'd ever imagined. Reed moved faster than Maggie could track, lunging for his pants, positioning himself between her and Cyrus, his body a shield even though they both knew there was no protecting her from this moment. The secret was out. The affair was exposed. And from the way Cyrus's hands were clenching and unclenching at his sides, violence was coming like a summer storm, inevitable and destructive. "Get away from my wife," Cyrus said, his voice deadly quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "Get away from her before I kill you where you stand." "Dalton, Cyrus, wait," Maggie started, clutching the blanket to her chest, but her husband's eyes swung to her, and the look in them made her words die. "You don't get to speak," Cyrus spat. "You don't get to explain or justify or whatever the hell you think you're going to do. You're a whore, Magnolia, a common whore, and I gave you everything, a home, a name, respectability, and this is how you repay me." Reed's jaw tightened. "Don't call her that. I'll call my wife whatever I damn well please." Cyrus took a step forward, boots heavy on the loft floor. "You think you're some kind of hero, Dalton? Saving the poor neglected wife from her terrible husband. You're just a fool who couldn't keep his hands off another man's property." "She's not property," Reed said, and there was steel in his voice now, hard and unyielding. "She's a woman, a human being who deserves to be treated like she matters. And you've treated her like unpaid labor for 3 years. What I do with my wife is my business." "Your wife?" Reed's laugh was bitter. "You haven't been a husband to her since your wedding night. You moved into the barn and left her alone in that bed and expected her to just, what, be grateful? Maggie told me everything, Thornwood. About how you turned away from her. About how you've made her feel worthless for 3 years. You don't get to play the wronged husband when you broke your vows first." The barn went deadly silent. Cyrus's face had gone from red to white, and Maggie saw something flicker in his eyes. Shame, maybe. Or the rage that comes from having your deepest failure exposed to daylight. His hand moved to his belt where he kept a hunting knife, and Maggie's heart lurched. "Cyrus, don't," she said, finding her voice. This isn't Reed's fault. It's mine. I'm the one who sought him out. I'm the one who couldn't live with the loneliness anymore. If you're going to be angry at me." Her husband's laugh was ugly. "Oh, I'm angry at you, Magnolia. I'm angry enough to divorce you for adultery and make sure every person between here and Omaha knows exactly what kind of woman you are. You'll have nothing. Be nothing. No decent man will touch you after I'm done telling your story." Maggie felt the old fear try to rise up, the fear that had kept her quiet and small and obedient for 3 years, the fear that she was nothing without Cyrus's name and protection. But then she felt Reed's presence beside her, solid and real, and she remembered what it felt like to be seen, to be wanted, to be alive. She stood up, wrapping the blanket around herself like armor, and met her husband's eyes without flinching. "Then do it," she said quietly. "Divorce me. Tell everyone. Destroy my reputation. I don't care anymore, Cyrus, because being nothing with my head held high is better than being your wife and disappearing a little more every day." Cyrus stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You can't mean that." "I mean every word." Maggie's voice grew stronger. "You want to know the truth? The real truth. I died on our wedding night when you turned away from me. I died a little more every morning I woke up alone. Every time you looked through me instead of at me. Every time you made me feel like my only value was how much work I could do. Reed didn't steal your wife, Cyrus. You lost her 3 years ago when you decided being ashamed was more important than being a husband. I had reasons. I know about your reasons. I know the war hurt you. I know something broke inside you that you couldn't fix." Maggie's eyes stung with tears, but her voice stayed steady. "And I tried to be patient, tried to be understanding, tried to love you anyway. But you wouldn't let me. You wouldn't let me touch you or know you or help you. You just left me alone. And I'm sorry for what the war did to you, Cyrus. I'm so sorry. But I can't keep paying for wounds I didn't cause." The fight seemed to drain out of Cyrus all at once. His shoulders sagged. His hand dropped from his belt. For just a moment, Maggie saw the man she'd married, broken and scared and trying so hard to hide it that he'd built walls no one could climb. "I gave you what I could," he said. And his voice cracked, "I know, but what you could give wasn't enough to live on." Cyrus looked between them, his giant bride wrapped in a blanket, standing tall and unashamed. The young farmer beside her, protective and defiant. Something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but maybe resignation. "I'll file for divorce," Cyrus said finally. "Adultery. It'll be ugly. The whole town will know. I know. You'll lose everything, not everything." Maggie reached out and took Reed's hand. "Not the things that matter." Cyrus's jaw tightened. He looked at Reed with pure hatred. "You better make her happy, Dalton. You better make this worth what it's going to cost her. Because if I find out you broke her heart after destroying her life, I'll come back and finish what I wanted to start here today." Reed squeezed Maggie's hand. "I'll spend every day making sure she knows she's loved. You have my word." Cyrus turned and climbed down the ladder without another word. They heard his boots cross the barn floor, heard his horse being yanked from the hitching post, heard hoofbeats fading into the distance, and then they were alone, in the terrible, beautiful silence of consequences. Maggie's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the loft floor, still clutching the blanket, and started shaking. Not from fear, from relief. From the overwhelming weight of finally being free. Reed knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. "It's done. It's over." "No," Maggie said into his shoulder. "It's just starting. The divorce will take months. The gossip will be brutal. Half the town will call me a whore, and the other half will just whisper it behind my back. I'll lose friends, respect, everything I built here. Then we'll build something new." Reed pulled back to look at her face. "We'll build it together. And Maggie, I meant what I said. I'll make you happy every single day. I promise." She believed him. God help her. She believed him completely. The divorce was exactly as ugly as Cyrus promised. The town divided into camps. Those who thought Maggie was a shameless adulteress who'd betrayed a good man. And those who'd seen how Cyrus treated her and whispered that they weren't surprised, she'd looked elsewhere. The gossip was vicious. Women who'd been friendly crossed the street to avoid her. Men looked at her with expressions that ranged from contempt to speculation about whether she'd be available for them now too. The preacher gave a sermon about the sanctity of marriage that everyone knew was aimed directly at her. But Maggie survived it. She moved into a small room above the general store that the owner's widow rented to her out of pity or kindness, or maybe just spite for the gossips. She took in sewing and washing to earn money, and every Sunday Reed drove his wagon into town and sat on the bench outside that room for hours, just so she wouldn't be alone. "You don't have to do this," Maggie told him one afternoon, sitting beside him in full view of everyone passing by. "Being seen with me is destroying your reputation too." Reed took her hand right there in public where anyone could see. "My reputation isn't worth protecting if it means hiding you." "I love you, Maggie. Let them talk." The divorce was final in March of 1877. Maggie walked out of the courthouse with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she was finally, legally free. Reed was waiting on the steps. He'd brought wildflowers, the first brave blooms of spring, purple and yellow against the grey prairie. "Marry me," he said. No preamble, no fancy speech. Just those two words and a hope bigger than the sky. Maggie looked at this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, wanted her when she felt worthless, and stood beside her when the whole world turned away. She thought about the price she'd paid for this moment, thought about everything she'd lost, and realized she'd gained so much more. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married by a circuit judge 2 weeks later in a ceremony with 2 witnesses from the next county who didn't know their story. Nothing fancy. No white dress or reception or congratulations from friends. Just 2 people promising to love each other in front of God and the law, and meaning every word. Their wedding night was in the small house Reed had built on his homestead, expanded now to include a real bedroom with a real bed and windows that let in the moonlight. He carried her over the threshold, even though she laughed and said she was too tall and too heavy. He carried her anyway, like she weighed nothing, like she was precious. "I love you," Reed whispered as he set her down gently. "I love your strength and your courage, and the way you take up space, like you finally know you deserve to. I love everything about you, Maggie Dalton." Maggie Dalton. Her new name, her new life. She pulled him close and kissed him with everything she had, gratitude and passion, and the fierce, wild joy of someone who'd walked through fire and come out alive on the other side. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for making me feel like I matter. You've always mattered. You just needed someone to show you." They made love slowly, tenderly, in their own bed, in their own house, with no shame and no secrets and no one to hide from. And afterward, wrapped in Reed's arms, with his heartbeat steady against her back, Maggie finally felt the stone she'd carried in her chest for years dissolve into nothing. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. The years that followed weren't easy. The combined ranch was hard work. The town's judgment lingered like smoke long after the fire died. They faced drought and debt and the thousand small cruelties that frontier life dealt everyone. But they faced it together. Reed kept his promise. Every single day he made sure Maggie knew she was wanted. A touch on her shoulder as he passed. A kiss on her forehead while she cooked dinner. The way he looked at her across the room, like she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, and Maggie bloomed. She smiled more, laughed more, stopped apologizing for her height and her strength and her presence. She became the woman she was always meant to be, powerful and soft at once, capable and vulnerable, someone who'd survived the worst and come out knowing exactly what love should look like. On their 5th anniversary, Reed found her in the garden at sunset, dirt on her hands and satisfaction on her face from a day's good work. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Dalton." Maggie leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the safety of him, the home of him. "Happy anniversary. Any regrets?" She thought about everything it had cost to get here. The scandal, the losses, the years of being called names by people who didn't know her story. She thought about Cyrus, remarried now to a woman from Kansas, supposedly doing better. She thought about the life she'd left behind. Not a single one, she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Reed turned her around and kissed her as the Nebraska sun painted the sky gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind whispered through the prairie grass. And Magnolia Dalton, the giant bride who'd confessed her loneliness to a stranger at a barn dance, stood in the arms of the young farmer who'd stepped closer and made her feel alive again, and knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Love wasn't always easy. It wasn't always simple. Sometimes it cost everything you had. But when it was real, when it saw you and wanted you and chose you every single day, it was worth every sacrifice, every judgment, every moment of fear, because being loved for exactly who you are is the greatest freedom in the world, and Maggie was finally, gloriously free. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. And tell us in the comments section below, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from our viewers across the globe. Your support means everything, and we can't wait to share more incredible stories with you. Subscribe now, and let's keep this community of storytelling growing together.